I'm now excited to introduce our next conversation, which is a fireside chat with Maisie Ganzler, an advisor and author of You Can't Market Manure at Lunchtime and Other Lessons from the Food Industry for Creating a More Sustainable Company. So there are signed copies of her book, right, I think on this side of the room, so you can grab one later. And joining her on stage is Eric Schmid, an economic development reporter for St. Louis Public Radio. Please give them a round of applause as they join the stage.
Good morning, everybody.
Hi.
And good morning to you, Maisie.
Good morning.
Hope everybody is having a wonderful beginning to their day. I want to start off by asking, we went out to many farms yesterday, and people probably have a lot of ideas or things churning around in their head of what they might want to implement or start working on. Is that true? Do people have ideas about what they want to do? Yeah? Okay, good. You made a career out of making real sustainable change at a business. What are some of those first steps, the incremental things, the things you can actually implement on Monday or Tuesday next week to get this ball rolling? Because as one of the interviews in your book said, everybody still has a day job, and you don't want to leave this conference and not start affecting change. So what are some of those things that you can start doing immediately?
Well, I totally agree with you that being out on the Niman farms is inspirational. And I think I was at Alderland, and I think that Paul is a really fantastic example of balancing both what you can do today and what you can do in the future. And so he showed us many practices that they are doing today that are more sustainable, from being truly crate-free, not using antibiotics, the list goes on. And then he talked about some of the things that are more new to their farm, like what Derek has brought back in terms of cover cropping and regenerative ag. And then he talked about a future, a dream of being truly regenerative and organic. And I think that we all can do that same thing for our own companies. Think about what you can do today. Not that it's low-hanging fruit, because none of those things that Paul talked about were easy, but what can you do today within your sphere of influence that maybe it's going to seem small just in your department? What would your midterm be? And then what is that big dream? And then create a true plan to work towards all of those. And you will get there if you keep at it.
Mm-hmm. Is that something that you feel like you developed at Bon Appetit while you were there for 30 years? I mean, what was the way that you would start to dissect a problem?
Well, in the beginning, we had to wrap our head around how to organize all of this information, and this is the most wonky, I'm going to now tell you about a spreadsheet. But I think it's a really important tool. So we created something called a core matrix. Core stands for Circle of Responsibility. It was our internal branding around sustainability. And the core matrix has 3 categories. It's a stoplight system: red, yellow, and green. Green are the things that you have made public commitments around. Yellow are the things that you're actively working on. And red are the ideas that you just can't crack the nut on. Maybe you haven't gotten around to it yet. Maybe it's too hard, you can't figure out what to do, maybe it's too expensive. And while at the beginning we literally brought that spreadsheet out on a quarterly basis, later it just was in my head all the time. But you want to get out into the world. Yesterday was a great example of that. So I'm preaching to the choir. You're people who are willing to travel and get out into the world. See your suppliers. See companies that are somewhat like you, but maybe doing things a little different. And start populating those red, yellow, and green lists. And it seems obvious that you want your green list to be really robust. Those are your public commitments. But where the real fun is in those yellows and the reds. What are you actively working on, and where are you stuck? And then what are those dreams, those crazy ideas? Write them down, capture them so you don't lose them. We're all here and we're inspired. Fill up that red list, and then over time, you'll move things up.
It sounds a lot like that is a way to start building momentum toward this, because that word and that's a sense that I get from reading your book, is that it's not a day-to-day thing, but it's about creating, starting that snowball at the top of the mountain and getting it to start rolling down. It starts off small, but then it will, all of a sudden, 5 years later, here we are, and we've done all these amazing things. I mean, can you reflect on that?
Yeah, there's a couple words that you used that I think are really important. One, you talked about the top of the mountain, and I think it's really important that the top of your organization is bought in on these things. I have a whole chapter about maybe you should rewrite your dream and put sustainability into your mission. If you don't truly have these concepts at the heart of your brand, it will never work. It will always be a nice to have, a side thing, something for a brochure. You need to truly believe it. You need your Paul Willis, you need your Jim Purdue to truly believe these things. So you start that snowball at the top of the mountain, and then you get it rolling, and it will become much more than just a commitment. I'm saying just a commitment to the earth, as if that's like some little thing, right? But it will become your greatest recruiting tool. It will become your retention tool, because everybody wants to be a part of this. I was talking to Paul Shapiro, who has a company called the Better Meat Co., but spent years at the Humane Society doing advocacy work. And we were recounting the first time Bon Appetit made a commitment to cage-free eggs. We were the first company to do so in 2005. And Paul said, we were all on the phone, huddled, going, what's she going to say? Is she going to agree to this? Is she not going to agree? Because they hadn't gotten any companies to agree yet. And he said, when you agreed, we all silently cheered. It was like winning the Super Bowl. And then he said, why did you do it? And I said, well, it was the right thing to do for the chickens, right thing to do for the business, but I want to win the Super Bowl too. It feels really good, right? This is fun. This is the stuff that gets you up every day, gets your team up every day, gets your customers excited. We can all be part of the Super Bowl. It's probably my only sports metaphor I'm ever going to use.
What you bring up there is really important, and what I think about, the sustainability platitudes. I mean, you see, we're responsibly raised, or we're, doing this, and it's a little bit vague sometimes with different companies or initiatives. And there's a peril in that, because, without having the support from the top like you had with your boss, Fidel, I guess what happens if you don't have that, and then maybe there's an economic downturn? I mean, can you speak about how incorporating it in through the whole company builds robustness, especially when the going gets tough, or it might look like, it's, things are costing a little bit more, and why having it throughout the company kind of builds resilience for actually achieving those sustainable goals?
Well, I do believe in aspirational statements. I think it's a really important tool. It's a motivator. It gives you a vision. But in addition to those aspirational statements, you've got to have a plan behind it. And you've got to institutionalize that plan. And what I mean by institutionalize is make sure that all of your company's systems are aimed at making that plan true, not just a platitude. So when people are rewarded, is their compensation actually tied to meeting sustainability goals? When you set up things that seem as mundane as your accounts payable system, is your accounts payable system tied to meeting sustainability goals? And that might seem a little bit like, how is accounts payable? But if you want to work with small farmers, if you want to work with diverse businesses, are you paying them quick enough that they can keep their business alive? So once you've got your sustainability tentacles throughout your whole company, it becomes much harder to turn it back. Because you're right, we are going to hit economic downturns. We are going to hit those bumps in the road. And is everybody in your organization incented to keep these dreams alive? You mentioned Fidel, the CEO of Bon Appetit. And one thing that he always said is you've got to focus on top line, and bottom line will take care of itself. You can't cut costs to success. There are companies that are completely value-based in terms of they are the low-cost provider. That is their go-to-market strategy. None of us are probably working for those. We are aspiring to be companies that are values-based and that we are driving our business through our values. It becomes part of our economic plan, not just an expense that we have to manage.
Well, and I think that also speaks to the fact that building these practices in isn't cheap. It's not the cheapest option, right?
It's not the cheapest option if you look at it purely as an expense.
Yeah.
If you look at it as it's also your marketing plan, if you look at it as it's also your PR strategy, if you look at it as it's also your employment strategy, it becomes to seem less expensive.
Mm-hmm. Can you get into some of how those, like the PR, the marketing, the strategy, like that is also very much linked into this work, because you can make immense change on the internal side of a company, but if people don't know about it, like, does it matter? I mean, you want people to know about it because then that might help build more momentum into the future. So, like, talk about why and how to implement that and why it is so important to also be communicative.
There are some companies that do a lot of great things but don't talk about them, and that's kind of a different corporate culture. Costco is like that. Be humble is a big piece of their corporate philosophy. I would argue that if you're being humble and you're keeping it secret, then it's probably also easier to cut it when things go bad or when customer interest seems to sway the other way. So I think if any of us want to, again, institutionalize these, we should also get our companies to talk about them publicly, because it's harder to turn back once you've done that. But a lot of us want to start with telling the story. And in my book, it's written in 5 lessons, and it's actually the 5th lesson, which is tell the story. I came up through communication, so I believe PR to be critically important, but I think operations always needs to be ahead of marketing. You can't have marketing driving the strategy of your organization. You have to have operations ahead, and then marketing telling the story of what they're doing. And you need to be willing to be transparent. That seems pretty obvious, but I would say radically transparent to a level that you're probably not comfortable with. And Niman does a great job. I mean, we are literally all together because they have opened the doors to their farms. That is not a thing that most agricultural companies do. It is very rare for them to just let us all tromp around a farm and hold a baby pig, which is great for PR. I love it every time.
And it's fun, too.
It is so fun. And how many of you put it on social media last night, right? Yeah. It's great to hold a baby pig. Even though we know we're going to eat them eventually. And that's okay. That's part of the transparency. It's part of the story. But I feel a lot better about it knowing that that pig had a great life.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned radical transparency. I also think like there's an element of clear definitions of what you're doing. It's not enough to say we're responsibly raising this, because who's defining responsibly raised? Is it more important to say like we're responsibly raising this and this is what we mean by that? You know, like the definitions of what the company is doing and how you communicate them. I mean, can you talk about how to actually put that out there in a way that is both authentic and like true to what is happening, and is still able to connect with, you know, maybe a general public or a general audience?
Well, I think you need both that top line message, like responsibly raised. Responsibly raised is a great thing to go on a logo, to go on a t-shirt, and anybody can understand that that's good, right? And for most of the population, that's going to be enough, just that halo of responsibly raised. Then there's going to want people that are going to want more. And that's where your website comes into play, because you can't put that much on a package, right? But that's where you start going into the attributes, and it's important to understand the attributes and to use the language correctly. So Niman says crate free. A lot of companies talk about open housing, group housing. That's not the same. Even gestation crate free is not the same, right? Because we've all seen now, we understand that when Niman talks about crate-free, they're talking about farrowing crates as well. I challenge anyone to find a mention of farrowing crates on any other pork producer's website, because Niman is the only one that is truly crate-free at scale. That's a really important detail, but not one that everybody probably understands or cares about. So you need both, that top line, positive, simple message, and then you need the receipts.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the receipts matter because people will pull them, and it can create negative PR or a negative attention if you're saying we're 100% XYZ and it turns out to be like 95%, which is still really good, but it's not 100%, and then people will start dunking on you in social media, and it could blow up an entire business. I think there is an example of that, right?
Yeah, in the book I give the example of a meat company that was vertically integrated, and so they were raising all of their own animals, and they had butcher shops, and they were doing direct to consumer with the promise that all of the meat came from their ranch. And one of their employees went on Instagram Live, not an influencer, not a guy with a big following, just a guy. He went on IG and he held up meat from not their farm and said, this F isn't local. This F isn't from where they promised. And he had a couple examples, and one was meat from Tasmania, and that's pretty extremely not local because he was in Santa Monica. But then he also had chicken from Pittman Farms, Mary's Chicken, which actually is pretty local and is doing some pretty great things that probably the customers would have been happy to buy if they had been transparent and just said, today the chicken's coming from Pittman Farms. No story, nothing. So this random dude with an IG account that goes live winds up getting over 30,000 views. The story gets picked up by the LA Times. It gets picked up by The Guardian. It is truly international news. Fast forward to today, that farm that was serving all of these different markets that had with a thriving business is now on glamping.com. You can go stay there because it's now a campsite, and all of those businesses are closed. When they did their internal investigation to see how much of the product they were selling wasn't local, it was 6%. How many of us, if we did a tally on our sustainability goals, hit 94%, would throw a party? I would. 94% is really good. It's when you promise 100 and you don't tell the story when you stumble, because I promise you, you will stumble. I promise you that. At a different Hog Farmer Appreciation Weekend tour, I remember hearing a story about a farmer getting the wrong feed by accident and accidentally feeding their pigs antibiotics. Mm-hmm. That happens. But if you have the system to catch it because you've institutionalized your sustainability and you tell the story first and you correct it, you're not going to be a glamping site. Mm-hmm. You're actually going to be more trusted by your customers. It actually becomes a point of pride to show that your systems worked and that your claims are authentic.
I guess, can we wrap up by, is there an example from your time at Bon Appetit where there was a failure for you or a misstep or something that went awry, went off the rails? How did you recover?
There were many times that there were failures and missteps because, there's some adage, I'm not going to get it right, but like if you're not failing, you're not trying. You're not far enough out there. And we had one of those problems around pork. We'll stick with gestation crates, where we wanted to go gestation crate free, and our supplier told us that they had, and I went around publicly touting that we had gotten bacon done at least. I was actually on a panel at the Chefs Collaborative meeting with Paul Willis and Barry Estabrook, both here, and I proudly talked about how we'd gotten the nation's largest pork supplier to give us gestation crate free bacon. And then I got a phone call one night to tell me that it actually wasn't gestation crate free technically, that the sows were still being kept in gestation crates until the confirmation of pregnancy. So as you all learned yesterday, a sow's pregnant for 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days, call it 4 months. These sows were being crated for about a month of that time. that's not what we meant by gestation crate free. That's not what anybody reading the thing on our website would have believed. And I can remember the moment very clearly. I was in a Hampton Inn somewhere, waiting to go to some meeting with the 2 double beds. You know, we've all been there late at night. You don't want to do anything. And I was like, oh my God. And my first call was to the Humane Society to say, hey, this thing that I've been saying isn't actually true, and I want you to hear it from me. Then we started trying to find new suppliers. We came out and visited Niman. We visited another supplier, took Barry with me. He wrote an article for Modern Farmer about it. It was a fantastic article, but he didn't name the names of the company that had lied, and I still wanted to. So then I did a blog post about it, and we put out a press release. That's radically transparent.
Well, Maisie, thank you so much for this conversation. Your book is You Can't Market Manure at Lunchtime, and it is focused on building sustainable practices into a food company. But as I was reading it, there are many other takeaways that I was thinking about that could apply to my own organization, which is not related to food procurement or buying at all. So there are ideas in here that I find universal. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much. Round of applause, everyone. Thank you. Great conversation, great anecdotes. Really appreciate all that. Another round of applause for them, please.